Hello everyone. Welcome to today's story. What if the person you love refuses your grand gesture, even when they're carrying your child? But here's the twist. What if there's a bigger question? Who really is the father of this child? James, a successful CEO, wants to give Diep everything: security, love, and a future. But Diep's hesitation creates doubt. Will James convince her to take the leap, or will the secrets between them tear everything apart? Stay tuned to uncover the truth and find out what happens next. And don't forget to subscribe and help us reach 1,000 followers. Trust me, you won't want to miss how this unfolds. James stood in the middle of the spacious room, the soft yellow glow from the ceiling lights casting shadows on the cold wooden table, where a contract awaited his signature. But in this moment, his mind wasn't there. His gaze drifted beyond the window, watching the trees sway gently in the autumn breeze, mirroring the unrest within his heart. His love for Diep was not a simple one. He recalled the first time they met, her smile warm and her eyes full of tenderness, as if she belonged to a simpler world, a world she still lived in. But now, anxiety about the future weighed heavily on him. Diep was pregnant, and James knew that what she needed wasn't just affection, but stability. A solid home where she could feel safe, where their child could grow up. How do I make her feel secure? How do I ensure she doesn't feel pressured by this love? James pondered. The answer came to him when he decided to give her a new house. Not just because she was the woman he loved, but because it was what she needed at this moment. He called his mother, sharing the idea. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she said softly, "Love isn't in grand gestures, James. It's in patience and understanding." But James couldn't stop thinking about Diep, about what she would think of the gift. Would she feel burdened? Would she reject it as she had with other offers in the past? In that vast room, James felt uncertain. He didn't have the answers yet, but one thing was clear. This decision would change everything. For him, love was not just words, it was action. And he would do whatever it took to show Diep he loved her. Not just through words, but through every little action. James spent the next few days in a whirlwind of preparations, securing the land and organizing everything for the house. Yet, despite his efforts, he couldn't shake the unease that lingered in his mind. As he sat at his desk, reviewing documents, his thoughts kept returning to Diep. The thought of her standing at the threshold of a new life, a life he hoped to offer her, filled him with both hope and anxiety. He had decided to tell her about the house, hoping she would feel the same excitement he did. But as he approached her with the idea, he sensed her hesitation. She looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty, and he knew she wasn't ready for the change he was offering. "I don't know if I can accept this, James," she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. "This house, it's too much. I don't want to leave the old place. It's the only home I've known." Diep's words cut through him like a quiet storm. A storm he had been bracing for but wasn't prepared to weather. He understood her reluctance, her connection to the old house, the memories it held. But he couldn't help but feel the weight of her refusal. What did this mean for them? Was their love enough to overcome this? James knew that she needed time to adjust, time to accept that change was necessary. But how much time? The uncertainty gnawed at him, and for the first time, he questioned whether his love was enough to bridge the gap between their worlds. Days passed in quiet tension. James continued his work, making arrangements for the house, but his heart remained heavy. Each time he brought up the idea to Diep, her response was the same: a quiet refusal, a gentle withdrawal. She hadn't said much, but her body language spoke volumes. Her eyes, always so full of life and hope, now seemed distant, uncertain. She would smile, but it was the kind of smile that didn't reach her eyes. James could see the conflict within her. She wasn't rejecting him. No, that was never the issue. She was rejecting the change, the unfamiliar, the pressure of a new life that seemed to come too soon. One evening, as they sat in the small kitchen of her old house, the silence between them thickened. The kitchen was dimly lit by a flickering lamp, the only sound the occasional creak of the wooden floor. Diep stirred the tea in her cup absent-mindedly, her gaze fixed on the steam rising from it. James watched her, feeling the weight of unspoken words hanging in the air. "I don't want to rush you, Diep," James said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I just want what's best for you, for us." Diep didn't meet his eyes. She set the cup down gently, her fingers lingering on the rim. "I know, James," she replied softly. "But it's too much. I'm not ready for all of it. I don't know if I can handle it." The words stung, though she hadn't meant them harshly. James tried to hide his disappointment, but inside, he was falling apart. The house, the future, their love, it all felt so fragile now, as if it could slip through his fingers at any moment. He didn't respond right away. The silence stretched on, and in that quiet space he realized that love wasn't just about giving. It was also about waiting, about understanding when to hold on and when to let go. The days following their conversation were filled with quiet contemplation. Diep spent most of her time in solitude, reflecting on her life, on the past that she couldn't shake off. James had been patient, giving her the space she needed, but even from a distance he could sense the inner turmoil she was facing. One evening, Diep sat by the window, staring out at the fading light as the sun set over the fields. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and the promise of change. She thought of the house, the life James was offering her, and it all seemed so overwhelming. She could feel the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Could she truly let go of everything she had known and embrace a future so different from the life she had imagined? The memories of her childhood in this small, crumbling house, the laughter, the tears, the comfort it once brought her, were still so vivid in her mind. The house, with its peeling paint and creaky floors, felt like a part of her, a part of who she was. How could she leave that behind? How could she accept something new when the old place still held her heart? She closed her eyes, feeling the tightness in her chest. It wasn't just about the house. It was about herself. Was she strong enough to change? To leave behind the things that had shaped her for so long? The doubt settled deep inside her, making her feel smaller than she ever had before. Diep was scared of the future, scared of making the wrong choice, scared of failing. But beneath the fear, there was a quiet voice that whispered she wasn't alone. James was there, waiting, patient, unwavering in his love. Perhaps, just perhaps, she could find the courage to step forward with him. She took a deep breath and made a decision. It wasn't clear yet, but she would try. She would talk to James. It was time to face the future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. The evening had fallen, casting a quiet shadow over the room as James sat at the table, lost in thought. Diep hadn't come by in days, and the silence between them had begun to feel heavy, suffocating. He had hoped that with time she would come around, that the decision would be easier for her. But each day that passed only deepened the distance between them. The house, his gift of love, felt like a symbol of everything that divided them. James felt torn. He wanted to offer her everything: stability, a future, a safe place for their child. But no matter how hard he tried, it seemed that the harder he pushed, the further Diep withdrew. His mother entered the room, sensing his inner turmoil. She had always known when something weighed heavily on his heart, and tonight was no different. "James," she said gently, sitting down across from him. "You're trying to give Diep everything, but love doesn't work that way. She's not ready yet. You can't force it." James met his mother's gaze, his frustration evident. "I want to give her the world, Mom, but I'm not sure she even wants it. She's not sure about me. What am I supposed to do?" His mother smiled softly, her eyes filled with understanding. "Love isn't about rushing, James. It's about patience and respect for the other person's pace. Let her decide when she's ready. Don't rush her into something she's not prepared for." James paused, the weight of her words sinking in. He had been too eager to fix things, too quick to offer solutions. But now, he understood. Patience was the key. "Thank you, Mom," James said quietly, a sense of calm washing over him. "I'll try to be patient." James spent the following weeks in a quiet, almost meditative state. He had taken his mother's advice to heart. The pressure he had been placing on himself to fix everything for Diep slowly melted away. He stopped talking about the house. He let the subject rest, allowing her space to breathe, to think. The quiet moments between them became more meaningful. There was no rush, no grand gestures, just the simple act of being there for each other. Diep, too, had begun to change. The fear in her eyes had faded, replaced by something gentler, more thoughtful. She spent more time at the farm, walking through the fields, her thoughts far away, yet somehow more at peace. She didn't need to decide anything right away. James had shown her that. He didn't demand answers, he simply waited. One afternoon, James visited her. The sun was low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the land. They walked in silence for a while, side by side, the rhythm of their steps matching the steady beat of their hearts. "You've been patient with me," Diep said softly, breaking the silence at last. "I've been thinking a lot, about everything, about the house, the future, and what it all means." James turned to her, his heart racing slightly. "And?" Diep smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting a mixture of uncertainty and hope. "I don't know if I'm ready for everything, but I'm ready to try, to take things one step at a time." James felt a rush of relief, but he didn't speak. He didn't need to. They both knew this was the beginning of something new, a new chapter, not just for Diep, but for them both. It wasn't about the house or the future anymore. It was about finding peace together, one step at a time. Days turned into weeks. And though things between James and Diep were still far from perfect, a shift had occurred. The tension that had once defined their relationship had softened. They didn't have all the answers yet, but they had something more meaningful: understanding, patience, and a quiet sense of trust. James had stopped worrying so much about the future. Instead of planning every detail, he focused on being present. Diep was still hesitant about making a decision about the house, But James no longer felt the urgency to rush her. She was taking her time, and that was enough. They had learned, through their silence and their quiet conversations, that love was not always about grand plans or dramatic moments. It was about being there for each other, through the highs and the lows. One evening, as they stood together, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Diep spoke again. "I'm not sure if I'm ready for all the changes yet, James," she said, her voice soft but steady. "But I'm willing to try. I'll take things one step at a time." James turned to her, his eyes filled with affection and gratitude. He didn't need her to have everything figured out right then. He didn't need a grand declaration. All he needed was her willingness to try, to face whatever came their way together. And that was enough. The night was still, the air filled with the quiet hum of the world around them. There was no rush, no urgency, just the promise of a future that would unfold as it was meant to. Love, they had both realized, wasn't about pushing forward. It was about moving together, side by side, at their own pace, letting the moments come when they were ready. And for now, that was all they needed.
James, một CEO thành đạt, Diệp tặng Diệp một ngôi nhà mới khi cô mang thai đứa con của anh, nhưng cô từ chối vì không sẵn sàng thay đổi. Mối quan hệ của họ trở nên căng thẳng khi Diệp cảm thấy không còn đủ tự tin gắn bó với ngôi nhà cũ. Mặc dù James yêu cô và muốn cô cảm thấy an toàn, anh cũng nhận ra rằng tình yêu không chỉ là hành động lớn mà còn là sự kiên nhẫn và thấu hiểu. Sau một thời gian, Diệp bắt đầu nhận ra tình yêu của James và sẵn sàng thử bước tiếp theo dù không hoàn toàn sẵn sàng. Câu chuyện kết thúc mở thông điệp về tình yêu chân thành và sự kiên nhẫn trong mối quan hệ của họ.